Hello, you're watching Crash Course Literature. I'm Helen, and today my colleague and I will be discussing Truman Capote's journalistic novel, In Cold Blood. There's been some debate on the validity of the evidence presented in this novel, and in order to calm the rumors, we've brought in some experts to give their own opinions. Hi Helen, thanks for having me. Based on the true murder of a father, mother, and their son and daughter, Truman Capote's In Cold Blood explores the effects a murder has on a small town in Kansas that, quote, other Kansans call out there. Capote describes the murders as taking place in cold blood by two men who previously celled together at Kansas State Penitentiary for previous crimes. The murderous duo, Dick and Perry, set out to drive 800 miles across the state to brutally murder 4 individuals. They are able to successfully murder the family without leaving behind any eyewitnesses and only leaving 2 clues for the detectives to use against them. Following the murder, Dick and Perry set out for Mexico, and then they returned to the States, where they continue to travel across country. During their trek, they are caught by KBI detectives and brought back to Garden City, Kansas for their trial. The 2 men are found guilty and placed on death row for 5 years, where they awaited their hanging. Now, this is where my opinion comes in, because I'm here today to explain to you that what you just listened to me say might not have been true, but it may have also been true. Capote presents the reader with a novel that is deemed a first of its kind, as it is nonfiction, written from a journalistic standpoint. But is it really nonfiction? There are abounding examples where Capote may have jumped the gun in his description of his work because fact quickly changes to fiction. In documents released by the Wall Street Journal, the Kansas Bureau of Investigation had a lesser role in the solving of the case than Capote made it out to be. Capote depicts the Bureau as a group of men who refuse to give up before they, quote, know what happened in that house, the why and the who. Specifically speaking, Alvin Dewey is illustrated to be heroic in his ability to crack the case, but according to the documents, Harold Nye was a significantly more important detective on the team and was a leader greatly responsible for the trial that came of finding Dick and Perry. Capote continues to portray Dewey as noble. When he writes that Dewey acted immediately on the tip from Wells and drove with fellow KBI members to reach the Hickok farm where they questioned Mr. and Mrs. Hickok about their son's parole violation. But once again, this was Capote taking some fictitious leniency in his writing, because, as it turns out, Nye and Church wanted to follow the tip immediately, but Dewey waited 5 days to act because he had a hunch it was someone in the town who committed the murder. Instead of going to the Hickok farm and disguising their reason for interrogation, the KBI members were greeted at the door by Mrs. Hickok. Upon being greeted, Mrs. Hickok invited them in and they proceeded to perform an unwarranted search of the house in hopes of finding evidence for the case. They told her their reason for arrival directly and made no small talk. Capote is creative with his diction choices and is persuasive, especially in part 1. Capote describes the Clutter farm with his opinion, and by doing so, compromises the validity and credibility of his work and ultimately revokes its objectivity. This diction choice sways the reader to believe that the farm is sacred and holy, rather than a piece of land which once belonged to a family before they were murdered in cold blood. The allusion to his opinion invalidates the fact with fiction. The last part 4 of the novel, is the most fictional because in fact, no pun intended, it did not occur. Capote writes that Dewey is visiting the grave of his father when he stumbles upon Susan Kidwell and reminisces on life before the murder. Now, if that isn't fiction, I don't know what is.
Alright, Helen, you gave some pretty convincing evidence, but I've got more to say about the journalistic novel In Cold Blood. I'm Kat, and I'll be explaining why this novel is truly fact, not fiction. In Cold Blood was one of the first journalistic novels. It is a factual account of what happened. The only difference is that Capote puts a literary spin on what is a non-fiction novel to make it more interesting. In preparation for writing this novel, Capote had to become a literary photographer, in which he took it upon himself to have a 20/20 eye for visual detail. He had known he wanted to do a novel like this, so 12 years ago he practiced listening to long conversations and transcribing them verbatim without taking notes or using a voice recorder. He practiced this skill and was able to become 95% accurate. Capote actually visited the location where the murders took place, so all of the descriptions of the setting in the novel were what he himself observed. With the help of his friend Harper Lee, author of To Kill a Mockingbird, he was able to interview actual residents of Holcomb that experienced a traumatic occurrence that impacted their community. Capote was able to get the vibe of the residents' reactions and portray it unbiasedly in his novel. He also interviewed numerous murderers and researched murder, murderers, and criminal mentality in order to prepare himself for being in contact with Dick and Perry. The first time Capote saw Dick and Perry was the day when they returned to Garden City. He was one of the members in the large crowd that day that waited in the square for nearly 5 hours, as he wrote about in the novel. It was after that when he became regularly in contact with the boys. He was able to listen to both Dick and Perry's retelling of the murder and what happened after it. Capote claimed that Dick had a great memory. This helped him, as Capote went everywhere that the boys went on their trip, every single hotel room too. Capote remarked that Dick could give me the names and addresses of any hotel or place along the route where they'd spent maybe just half a night. He told me when I got to Miami to take a taxi there, number 232, and opposite I'd find 2 umbrellas into the sand which advertised tan with copper tone. Perry, on the other hand, was claimed to be better at remembering conversations and moods. Capote claims that Perry was much better at describing the general sort of mood or atmosphere than Dick, who, though very sensitive, was impervious to that sort of thing. With the combination of Dick and Perry, Capote seemed to have a really solid understanding of what happened through the boys' point of views. Capote's interactions with the boys were also not just a one-time meeting. While Dick and Perry were on death row, he wrote each of them twice a week. The only detail that Capote claims to not be entirely true, besides the last scene, are a few character names. There were 3 characters who he changed in the novel: Perry's old cellmate, Willie J., Perry's sister, and Mr. Bell, the man who offered a car ride to Dick and Perry. However, the names are such trivial details that can be understood if changed, for the sake of the people's privacy. By the end of it all, Capote had hundreds and hundreds of files of research, all of which helped him to write this novel factually and unbiasedly. Capote clearly had a secure holding of what the case and its murderers were like. To say that he didn't fact-check himself is a bit ridiculous. Clearly, both Helen and I have evidence backing up each side to whether or not the novel In Cold Blood is fact or fiction. But what do you guys think? Leave a comment below telling us your opinion of whether or not this novel is fact or fiction. Crash Course is written and produced by Helen Halpern and myself. This episode was filmed in the gracious Arenas household and made with the help of these nice people. This episode is dedicated to Miss Valvano and her Period 2 English 4 senior class. Thank you for watching, and as they say in John Green's hometown, don't forget to be awesome.